Our host, for those of you who would like to follow along with the interpreting during the session, please click on this link that I just posted in the chat box. And my name is Denise Marshall. On behalf of COPE and the 8 other national organizations that are sponsoring this session on graduation considerations and implications for students with disabilities, I'd like to welcome you. This is the 3rd in our series. And, as Candace has put on here, all of the archives of each of the sessions, in case you missed the first 2, and the handouts will be available at higherexpectationsforall.org. Groups that are co-sponsoring with us on this series are DREDIS, HASH, Easterseals, the National Center for Learning Disabilities, the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities, the Advocacy Institute, CPSC, and the National Disability Rights Network. To introduce to you our 2 speakers today. I have Candace Criella, who is the founder of the Advocacy Institute, a nonprofit that develops products and services to improve the lives of people with learning disabilities. Candace has been a leader in this area for a number of years. She serves on the COPA Board of Directors and has been a longtime COPA member, and she has worked on many issues and reports and trained hundreds of parents on their rights and responsibilities of the years, and she recently authored a report on graduation rate for students with learning disabilities for the National Center for Learning Disabilities, and you can get that on their website. We're also pleased to have Martha Thurlow with us, who is the director of the National Center on Educational Outcomes. Thurlow, in this position, addresses the implications of U.S. policy and practice for students with disabilities and English language learners, including national and statewide assessments, policies, and practices, standard-setting efforts, and graduation requirements. So thank you both for being with us here today. I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball on to you, Candace, and turn the session over to you.
Thank you, Denise. That's for your introduction, and thank you to all the sponsoring organizations, and in particular to COPA, the organization, for hosting these events. I'm just thrilled to be joined by Dr. Thurlow today. She's a very busy lady, but happens to probably be the single most expert person in the nation on this issue that we're going to be talking about, having conducted numerous state surveys and compiled many of reports on this issue. We're going to be drawing most of what we're going to talk to you about today from 2 reports. One I issued, that I wrote to the National Center for Learning Disabilities a couple of years ago, called Diplomas at Risk, and while that report was focused on students with learning disabilities, it also has a lot of information that's just more in general about students with disabilities and graduation issues. And then shortly after that report was issued, Thurlow and her colleague David Johnson at the University of Minnesota wrote a report for Achieve called Graduation Requirements for Students with Disabilities, Ensuring Meaningful Diplomas for All Students. And that document is available at achieve.org, and I highly recommend that you download it and give it a really thorough read. Here's an attempt to cover for you today. I'm going to talk about the different graduation rates for students with disabilities, the different ways that are used to calculate the rates. And Martha's going to talk about the policies across states and what connections, if any, we can draw between the policies and the rates. And then we'll close with some considerations that we think are really critical for students and parents as they out graduation options for their kids with disabilities. Let's start by explaining to you the 2 methods of calculation that you'll see used to determine graduation rates for kids with disabilities. And I by that, in all of this context, we're talking about DEA eligible students only. None calculations take into consideration students with disabilities who might be under 504 plans or who might have a disability but are not IDEA eligible. So keep that in mind. The first rate, and the one that we have the most history with, is called the LEADER rate, and it basically just takes 1 year of data and figures out a calculation of how many that left the system graduated with a regular diploma. It's been used for many years, and it's derived from what's called exiting data that has to be submitted by all of the states annually as receiving their IDEA federal funds. So it has some limitations, and it has some things that aren't available through the other rate that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So the LEADER rate is clearly considered to be the least reliable measure of graduation rate. It's really just what's called often an event rate or a snapshot, because it just takes that 1 year slice of data and the calculation. That it does offer, however, is that it is available by disability category, which is an important thing for many of us who do this kind of work, to be able to drill down to graduation rates and dropout rates by disability category, the third category is in IDEA. It's available by race and ethnicity, and I'm going to show you some of that data in a minute. And it gives us the other ways that students are leaving the system, whether they're getting a certificate or something other than regular diploma, they're dropping out, they're aging out, they move to general education, all those different pieces. So there are some shortcomings and some strengths to the LEADER rate. One of the opportunities here is that we can always do this calculation by disability category. So I've given you here the 2010-2011 percentages of students with disabilities graduating with a regular high school diploma by disability category. So you can see the range there between the lowest rate of 40% of kids with intellectual disabilities all the way to 79% for kids with visual impairments. Of course, the biggest group of children, just a little over 40% of all IDEA-eligible students, are in the specific learning disability category, which is about a 68% of graduation through this calculation. And that we are able to look at this data is by race and ethnicity. Unfortunately, we're not able to look at by race, ethnicity within disability category, which is something I wish we could do. But that's not it's not to say that that data may not be available to you through your State Department of Education. We're limited here to what is reported all the way to the federal level. So you can see here the blue bars being graduated with a regular diploma. The vast discrepancy we have of kids with disabilities who are white graduating at a rate of 71% versus the lowest group, kids with disabilities who are black, graduate at just over 50%. So you can see the dramatic difference. We are able to look at this through the lens of race and ethnicity. And it becomes particularly important when we take into consideration that we do have an overrepresentation of black children in special education. So it makes it even more dramatic, the gaps that we're seeing there. That's a little bit about the LEADER rate, and from here on out I'm going to really be talking and showing you data on a newer rate that we've been using for the last few years called the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. A formula that was mandated by a legislation put into place in 2008 within the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or what a lot of people refer to as No Child Left Behind. It was a product of a initial effort together by the National Governors Association through their work on education policy over many years, and they can understand that the rates of graduation that were being used across the states rendered us completely incomparable numbers, and they were interested, in fact, in coming to some cohesive formula so that these rates could be, in fact, across states. That within this regulation that required states to start reporting annually the number of students who are a regular diploma in 4 years. The definition of the 4-year adjusted cohort rate, and it's really not as complicated as it looks. It's a 4-year rate. That's the number of students who graduate in 4 years or less. If there are kids who are graduating in less than 4 years with a regular high school diploma, and the regulation defines a regular high school diploma, and I'm going to share that with you in a minute, divided by the number of students who formed the adjusted cohort for the graduating class. In other words, from the beginning of 9th grade through their graduation, through exiting the system, that is the cohort. And that cohort, if kids move within a district or even within a state, they remain in that cohort. And so there's some very stringent ways that student can be taken out of the cohort, and that's what protects it and makes it much more valid and reliable and across states. The states were required to report the ACGR for all student subgroups that are required to be reported for other purposes under No Child Left Behind. So we have in all students rate, we have a for races and ethnic groups. We have a rate for low-income students, a rate for English language learners, and a rate for students with disabilities. And now 3 consecutive years, the last year just coming out about 2 weeks ago. There is limitations to the ACGR as it relates to students with disabilities that I've discovered in my work on this issue of the last few years. The big one being that the states can set their own definition for which students with disabilities get counted in their ACGR rate for students with disabilities. Some states are using a method that as if you start your career in the cohort, if you begin 9th grade with an IEP, then you're counted. Others only kids who exit with an IEP. Other states count kids who only have an IEP for the entire 4 years of their high school career. And there might be some other formulas out there that we're not even aware of. But you can see just from these different approaches to including kids with disabilities in your ACGR rate that you can end up with significant variance across states. And you're going to do that's what's happening. Of course, the ER is not available by disability category, and it's not available although it is available by race and ethnicity, it's not available for race and ethnicity within the students with disabilities category. So we are not able to do some of the fine-grained analysis that we're able to do with the lever rate. So with benefits and limitations to all of the approaches. So, definition of a regular high school diploma defined by the federal regulations that mandate the ACGR calculation. It's a diploma awarded to students in a state that is fully aligned with state's academic content standards and does not include a high school equivalency credential, which as we know as the GED, certificate of attendance, or any alternative award. Also includes the higher diploma that might award. When Martha starts taking the landscape of policies across states, it's important to kind of keep this definition in the back of your mind, and as you're looking at some of the things we're telling you are going on in some of the states, ask yourself the question, does that result in the student getting a diploma that is fully aligned with the state's academic content standards, the content standards that apply to all students? It's from the ACGR that was just released 2 weeks ago, which for the 2012-2013 academic year for students with disabilities. The range from a high of 80% in Arkansas to of 22% in Mississippi. A minute, the graph for all of the states, or if you downloaded the handout that I sent to you yesterday, you have that chart, and you can look at your state and see where you're standing within this incredible range of the percentage of students with disabilities getting a regular high school diploma in 4 years. And the gaps between the all-student rate and the students with disabilities rate from a high of 53 points in Mississippi, where a graduation rate for all students of 75% versus a graduation rate for kids with disabilities of 22%, to a low of 3 points in Alabama, where there's a rate for all students and 77% for students with disabilities. So you can see here all of these incredible ranges that we're experiencing through disabilities. The range for across states for the all students rate is much more narrow. It's goes from a low of 69% to a high of 88%. So the discrepancies in the range across students with disabilities raise some serious questions. Some of them answered by the policy landscape, some of them possibly answered by those anomalies in the states that are counting kids with disabilities in their ACGR. So we have in 3 columns all of the states ACGR for students with disabilities for 2012-2013, ranked from high to low. So again, you see the high of 80%, low of 22% in Mississippi. We have a state that has yet to report their ACGR data, Idaho, and they continue to have some kind of, from the department to delay their implementation. You can see how troubling this range kind of needs to be as we look at try to decipher the policies for kids with disabilities. In fact, the analysis of the gap that I mentioned earlier, the gap between the all students rate and students with disabilities rate. So you see that here again, ranked from highest, the state with the biggest gap to the state with the lowest gap. Again, 53 points in Mississippi, gap of 3 points in Alabama. And Alabama has also shown the most dramatic change in their ACGR for students with disabilities over the 3-year period that we've been collecting this data. So there's really some dramatic changes in their graduate policies in that state. So see from these 2 charts, you can find your state, you can see how you're doing, and begin to ask questions about how your graduation policy might be impacting these numbers. To now turn over to Martha and start her off with a quote that I scooped out of her very wonderful paper for Achieve.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
it was a real opportunity for Achieve to actually come to us and say, you know, a lot of our states are just needing help thinking through what they should be doing for students with disabilities. So we had the opportunity to go back and forth with Achieve to put together this document for their states. And it was an opportunity, I think, for us to highlight, you know, what is our ultimate goal for students with disabilities. We want them to be able to leave school, ready to be successful in a career, to go into post-secondary education, and it's possible that some of our policies related to graduation requirements, in fact, might be an unintended negative consequence of interfering with that kind of goal. And so in the quote here, you see kind of the goal that we laid out in our thinking about graduation requirements and students with disabilities. And that being that we want students with disabilities prepared for post-secondary education and careers, that they deserve to have access to this academic skills that they need so they can make their own decisions. They shouldn't be having that decision like imposed upon them because they didn't have the academic preparation that they needed. And as you'll see, when we go through the graduation policy stuff, there are policies that in fact, I don't want to say encourage, but potentially get in the way of educators making sure that they have the academic preparation that they need. So kind of start by, again, going back to, you know, a lot of times we get the question of, well, you don't really mean, you don't have kids with disabilities because we know who those kids are. And they're all kids in the alternate assessment, and they all have intellectual disabilities, and that's the population we're dealing with. And I know you all know this, but we look again and again and refer people to a huge diversity in our students with disabilities, and we need to be remembering that as we think about our expectations for students. So this next pie chart kind of highlights that it's at least, and I emphasize that, at least 80% of students who have IEPs who should be meeting the same graduation standards that are set for all students. We have a lot of work to do in terms of instruction, appropriate accommodations and other access avenues. A lot of supports that we need to be providing, but that doesn't mean that they should not be meeting the same standards. So I think it's really important to always ground ourselves there. And then when you have the opportunity to read the Achieve article, you'll see that we raise questions about, well, 80%, 85%, what about the others? And emphasizing the importance of all students with disabilities being prepared for post-school life, whether it be a career or further post-secondary training. And I think we have real critical considerations there as well. Okay, so into that policy landscape that Candace referred to. I should start out with this, but once you start digging into the policy, it's very easy to become confused. So we've done this over the years very systematically, and right now we are doing this again, digging into the policies because they do change. And so, you know, Candace gave us numbers, trying to relate policy to those numbers. We can't exactly do right now because we don't have an analysis of the policies for 2012, 13. So because they change, we would need to look at them for each year when we're looking at data. But you get a really good sense of what's going on by looking at the policy landscape that I'll highlight here. And this one was based on, well, I can't remember the year, 2010-11, I believe. So when you look across states, you see significant variation in even the kinds of options for that end-of-school document, sometimes called diplomas, sometimes called other things. So variation is from having a special ed diploma, an IEP diploma, occupational diploma. You see the list here. We've got, and just a partial list of states call them. To the diplomas at risk for the state-by-state option, that's a really good place to go to look at those. Pretty clear. They're categorized there, so, you know, even if general category is, shows up for your state, it may be that it has a slightly tweak on the exact name given to it. Different options out there for students with disabilities. We set, when we look at us across the states and the array of options that they have, those states that have the highest number of options, other kinds of end-of-school documents, will seem to have, in general, the lowest graduation rates. So in diplomas at risk, you'll see Nevada being there kind of as the most stark example of that. States that have occupational, vocational diplomas also tend to have lower rates of students receiving regular diplomas. Examples in diplomas at risk: Alabama, Florida, Mississippi. In general, most states that have either an IEP or a special ed diploma have lower rates of students earning regular diplomas. And that, you know, seems to make sense, but it also suggests that, you know, it also leads to questions about if we, you know, can identify about 80% of the students who should be getting a regular diploma, why do those so many options affect the rate so much? We look at what the requirements are for, and what I've called a standard diploma, what is in law a regular diploma. Look at the policy landscape in terms of what states offer. We found that in this year, 17 states offered only that standard diploma to students. So that was the only option available. There were not other kinds of diplomas or end-of-school documents out there. And when we look at those, we see that higher rates of standard diplomas in states with fewer options, so higher rates of students receiving the standard diploma. So Pennsylvania had 2 options and a 74% adjusted cohort graduation rate for students with disabilities. These are not one-to-one correlations, but there's trends there when you look at the data. And as you will hear as I continue, it's really much more complicated than this because of some of the criteria that states have for getting a regular diploma. So I'll get into that just a bit. Okay, so just we've got some bottom lines when we're looking at other kinds of options for end-of-school documents that are out there, what we call here alternative diplomas. Concerns, these are really problems or concerns or issues, unintended consequences perhaps. I worry that they tend to or promote making early decisions about which kind of diploma a student should be going for, and in turn that impacts instruction, thinking about all the other kinds of supports that students need. So early decisions, always kind of a red flag in my mind. They tend to be confusing to IEP teams, to post-secondary education institutions, to the business community. It's hard to keep track of what all those different things are, what do they mean, are some of them the same as a regular diploma and some of them not. I think it's very confusing. We found that in a survey that we did with State Department people, that often the alternative diplomas were developed without input from stakeholders. So no one from post-secondary education, no one from the business community had been involved in discussions of, well, should we have a special education diploma? Should we have an occupational diploma? So it's always a bit of a worry when policies haven't heard from stakeholders. And then, of course, they don't count for the adjusted cohort graduation rate. So anything that's not deemed to be a regular diploma doesn't count for that rate. And significantly impacts, of course, in some states more than others, that adjusted cohort graduation rate is. So, even in a little more depth, kinds of allowances that are made for students with disabilities to receive that regular diploma. So, you know, do exactly the same thing as all other students, or are there some kind of allowances targeted toward students with disabilities? And we found in our work looking at policies that the list here were common kinds of allowances that were made. Could be reducing the number of credits that a student had to get to graduate with a diploma, allowing for substitute courses to the course requirements, and sometimes those courses would be considered equivalent and sometimes not. States sometimes had policies where they could lower the performance criteria. So say, you know, most students have to get if they have an exam, for example, most students have to get a score of 200 on the state test in order to be considered eligible for a regular diploma. For students with disabilities, for example, the IP team might decide, or the state might decide, that those students have to get a 150, just as an example. The notion of granting extensions, more years, affects the adjusted graduation rate, and we can have long discussions about is it appropriate or not to be able to say and still count a student if they've taken 13 years to get a regular diploma versus others. And then finally, the IEP team being able to make that decision. So as I go on, I'd like to just look, let's talk about what, you know, I'm going to talk about some of the course requirement stuff and then some of the exam requirement stuff. Not all states have exams, so kind of look at both of those. But in terms of thinking about what states should be doing to help us kind of look at and sort through what's going on, we want to be sure that states are collecting and reporting on numbers and percentages of students who are seeking some kind of modification to the requirements to get that regular diploma, that standard diploma. We don't have a data mechanism for collecting those data, but their data are really important to understand whether something unique is going on that could be countered in some way. And we need to ensure that students and their parents understand the impact of these kind of modifications on criteria that students are meeting. Very, very important, because we want students to be leaving with the skills they need to be successful in adult life. So again, a few bottom line, this relates to those course requirements. So we're seeing that diplomas are awarded with significant modifications to the requirements for a standard diploma, and that those significant modifications, in fact, may reflect a level of readiness that is not what is needed for post-secondary education or for a job. Misleading to students and families. If they've earned a regular diploma, doesn't that mean they've the knowledge and skills needed to be successful post-high school? And if enough modifications have been made that that's not the skills that they've left with, that's a significant problem. And we've misled parents and students. And the other thing that comes into play here is that in most states, but in most states, once the student receives that regular diploma or anything deemed to be a regular diploma, that student is no longer able to receive special education services unless the state has implemented some kind of policy that indicates they can continue to receive special education services. So, exams. This is a whole other layer. So, all states, well, that's an overstatement. All states or districts within states have course requirements students have to meet in order to get a regular diploma. Some states also have an exit exam that that students have to perform at a certain level to receive that regular diploma. So I want to look at what's going on in those states that have what we call high-stakes exit exams for students. Again, this is based on 2011-12. 25 states then had exams that students pass. We are again, and some of the states that had exit exams have dropped them. Some other states have adopted them. In our look at what's going on for students in the 2014-15 graduation class, we have right around 31, I think, states have a high-stakes exit exam for students. So that number goes up and down, but, you know, right now it's a little bit up. So when you look at those exit exams and the policies that surround them for students with disabilities, again, we see different things going on. Use of different tests or passing scores, student disabilities being exempted altogether from having to pass the test and in some cases take the test. Accommodations that are allowed during test taking, which are important, sometimes are altered so that they may be changing what the intent of measurement is. So lots of different things going on related to exit exams. And again, look at diplomas at risk. Very nice, you know, demonstrating kind of what's going on there. And, you know, well, let me do the bottom line and then I'll make a comment. There's research that has found that students with disabilities are more likely to receive those alternative kinds of diplomas or other end-of-school documents in states that have high school exit exam requirements for graduation. So adding that test has added the perceived need to have other ways for students to meet requirements. And again, you've probably heard this message from me several times, but just giving the student the diploma, letting them be exempt from exit exam requirements, again, in lack of student readiness. And this is a complicated thing related to we're not taking the test, need to worry so much that they've gotten that content. So there's a kind of a snowballing effect there. What do families need to know and do? And these are here, but I have to say, dug into the policies related to graduation requirements for more than a decade now. It's really tough, and especially when we started looking at the policies, it almost seemed like states were, states. This was a while ago. It almost seemed like states were trying to what was going on. I think the transparency has improved. It's still hard to figure out exactly what is going on policy-wise. So it's important to understand the requirements for a standard diploma. And focusing on your state is going to help because you don't have to be looking across all the states. But still, it's going to be a challenge, and it probably means talking to people as well as looking at documents that you get from your school, talking to people in your school, and look on the website. It's really important to understand the kinds of alternative diplomas, end-of-school documents that might be available in your state, and thinking through their value to post-secondary education institutions and to businesses and employers. Understand the impact of accommodations and modifications, and I haven't even gone into, one of my other favorite topics, accommodations, because the landscape is changing there as well. But being clear what the impact of decisions about accommodations is really, really important. Are they going to have an effect on where the score is considered to be comparable to other scores? And that relates to the assessment. It relates to the coursework as well. And require, or maybe even demanding parent-friendly information about the criteria and about the decision-making process is really, really important. And that, I'm going to end so that we can open it up to questions, just noting that a couple of resources that are available at NCEO. A lot of the data that we've talked about on policies is based on this Technical Report 62. It's cited in the Achieve document. I think it's cited in Diplomas at Risk. It's a look at what was going on in that 2010-2011 time period. As I said, we are working on examining policies again right now, and done one splice, which is a look at, for those students with significant cognitive disabilities who participate in states' alternate assessments based on alternate achievement standards, what's going on there? Can those students earn a regular diploma? And what do they need to do to earn a regular diploma? And we could do that if we want to. And then a second, that's the second thing that's listed there. And that will be, I think actually it's now on the NCEO website. It's not in the most accessible version, but it's there so that people can look at it, and we'll have the accessible version posted very quickly. And with that, I think I will turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Martha. That was wonderful. Very enlightening. Raises more questions than answers, right? It's
of course.
a thorny part of this whole discussion, and we're not to draw too many conclusions with regard to the policy landscape. So we have done that, given you a view of what's out there, what's going on, and possibly some connections that you might want to make. And as Martha mentioned, these policies are constantly changing. I just kind of right before we went on the air here today, I was chatting with people in Alabama, trying to figure out what, in fact, has had such a significant impact on their ACGR for students with disabilities. And, they discontinued an occupational diploma. They discontinued their exit exam requirement. So, there's been some significant changes that are now resulting in a significant improvement for kids with disabilities being reported as earning a regular diploma in 4 years. Did want to mention that there is a brand new, in addition to all the wonderful work that Martha Center does, there's also a brand new federally funded center that comes online beginning of the new year. I'm forgetting exactly what they're calling themselves, but their mission is to work with across states to improve post-secondary education and employment for students with disabilities. And so I'm certainly hoping that they take a look at these issues as well, because you can't very well improve post-secondary education and employment without kind of taking into account all of the discrepancies that exist across the states in how kids are exiting their secondary education. So I'd like to take your questions. Questions?
I haven't been yet, but just a reminder to everybody, if you do have a question, please write it in the chat box to the right and send it in to all participants if possible, or at least to the panelists and the host. We've got a couple minutes. If you guys could comment on, if we're looking at those, it seems to me that as we're looking at the charts that you shared, Candace, and then the information that Martha shared, that it's very hard to know what those numbers mean in terms of the percentage of students graduating, or even the gap with looking specifically at what your state's policy is in regards to presenting other kinds of diplomas. So, I mean, just frankly, just glancing at it to see that Arkansas and Alabama have 80% or 78% doesn't really mean a whole lot on its own, does it?
Oh, no. Yeah, right. You do have to dig into it, and also I think, and Martha kind of alluded to this, and I've been trying to maintain a dialogue with the U.S. Department of Education around they're bringing some specificity to what can in fact be counted in ACGR, and that's what we need to focus on is what type of as much as if school documents are being counted as in the AGR, and remember that definition that I showed you, that a regular high school diploma is in federal regulation, fully aligned, the same content, academic content standards that apply to all students. So at some point, a lot of these admissions policies, these modification policies, I'm confident are allowing kids with disabilities to literally be taken to a whole separate track of instruction, yet still being awarded a regular diploma. And we talked about some of the liabilities that are associated with that, including the big one being that when you get a regular high school diploma, according to IDEA, it's a change of placement and you're done. Unless, as Martha said, the state has some specific protections that allow kids to continue. But this is a huge liability for kids with disabilities. So just one of them in this whole confusing landscape. So, the question in my mind becomes, I don't know what the best solution, what the best array of options are for a state to make available. In Virginia, where I live, we have a modified diploma for students with disabilities. Would not have counted in the ACGR, and they did away with it and put in its place a set of what they call credit accommodations, which are different things that how students complete their regular coursework. And but the important thing about that is that there is a very defined eligibility process that's attached to determining whether or not kids with disabilities can, in fact, access the credit accommodations. And that's a whole nother piece of this that we didn't even get into, is the whole issue around, okay, you're allowing these different modifications. How are you determining what a youngster can in fact access them, or is it just open to everybody? That becomes then a whole nother issue. Martha?
Say you're exactly right. There are many more layers to the policies that surround this than we've even mentioned. And one is that eligibility. Another is there are a lot of what are called alternative ways to meet the same requirements, except that some don't actually meet the same kinds of performance requirements, and some do. And so having alternative ways for kids to demonstrate their knowledge and skills from perspective is really, really important. But that it's the same kinds of knowledge and skills that all other students are getting, so that when they leave high school, they're ready for college and careers, is really critical. And that's something that's very difficult to figure out.
Sounds to me like there's not a definition that's a standard way to understand what that term fully aligned means.
Correct. That's right.
No, the other thing is in federal law they use, I don't have it right in front of me, but it's fully aligned to the content standards, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's a set of performance standards. So it's not just, an alignment to the content. It's you're performing at a certain level. So there's a whole other kind of layer to that as well.
Another thing that is worth pointing out is that, and I had this pointed out to me over the last several months in working with states who've made dramatic changes to their graduation requirements for kids with disabilities, and that the more modifications and substantial modifications and adjustments and allowances are made for kids with disabilities to be given a regular high school diploma, actually results in somewhat of a degradation of the value of that regular diploma for the undisabled kids. And then you might, in fact, end up having in particular saying, well, wait a minute, I don't know what regular diploma means for a kid in X state now. This changes. So important for us to do as we can to accommodate kids with disabilities. It's so important for us to have some regard for the kids without disabilities who are not getting any allowances for complete regular diploma.
I understand that some folks are having a little difficulty with the chat box, so I apologize for that, but you can also, as Beth has done, raise your hand. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Beth to ask her question, and then others, I think the chat box should be working now, so if you want to send in a question. But go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, so that was pretty good that I sent an email, huh?
Yeah, you know how to get a hold of my attention, so good job.
I have to call you on your cell, too. Of course, this is from, minutes ago, but so you might have already covered this or answered it as I was trying to figure out how to ask the question. But my curiosity for both of you is how you feel like the Common Core is going to affect moving forward, whether we feel like this is going to put in a better situation or whether it's going to cause more confusion.
Martha?
Oh, dear. I'm not even sure where to start on that one. So, I think there are a lot of advantages to the Common Core in that it sort of brings some consistency across states. Because that's another thing we haven't mentioned, but is implied by some of the data that you saw that Candace presented, is that, say I graduate with a regular diploma in state X, and then I move to state Y, where the criteria are totally different. I don't have the knowledge and skills expected there. So the Common Core, part of the benefit for all kids, I think, is that it brings some consistency across the U.S. in terms of what's expected of kids, what they need to know and be able to do. And it recognizes that, we're living in the world of 20 years ago. We're living in a global community where you know, certain kinds of skills. And so that's a very positive. The challenge, there are lots of challenges associated with the core, is, you know, make sure that the instruction is up to speed. And past history has shown us that often those teachers who are working with students with disabilities don't get access to those standards at the same time others do, and may not know what they are, and so how they provide instruction that's needed. So there are a lot of issues around it. I'm an optimist and think that in the end it's going to be good, but we're going to have some of struggle, particularly as assessments get aligned to the Common Core state standards or whatever college and career-ready standards states have adopted. Not all states have adopted the Common Core, but pretty much all states have said we're going to adopt college and career-ready standards. So I think there are going to be challenges in the next several years, and in those states that have Common Core college and career-ready standards, the assessments are going to be more rigorous, so there's a lot of challenges that I'm hoping in the end will be good for kids with disabilities because it will getting them what they need to know and be able to do as they leave school. So I answered your question.
And I'll just add, Martha, that I'm not quite as much of an optimist as you are, so I always look to you for guidance because, you know, we've seen some of these movies before, and when we begin to implement No Child Left Behind and its requirements to break out assessment, participation, and performance for subgroups of students, including students with disabilities, and we finally started seeing that kids with disabilities, even though it's a requirement and idea that they participate in district and assessments, a lot of them weren't. And yet what happened was that we saw the development of some policies, particularly the addition of an alternate assessment on modified achievement standards that were put into place to really serve as kind of, you know, to boost some of the tension that kids were feeling. And then we've worked very hard over the last few years to get those assessments taken away through the waiver process. So unfortunately, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that while we know what kids with disabilities need to get to the standards, that's, you know, instruction and teacher preparation and technology and appropriate accommodations, that's not always is the first thing that happens. So I think we have to be, as parents and advocates, we have to be very vigilant as states move to the Common Core and the Common Core aligned assessments, or their new assessments aligned to whatever their higher standards are, to make sure that we don't allow these practices to be put into place that marginalize this group of children.
Well, that is a good segue into a question that's on here from Alexis, which is, can you give some information for how folks can best address these issues in an IEP or when discussing transition planning?
I'll start listening to you. Now that I'm feeling down, no, you're exactly right. There's hope in some of the policies that are implemented, and then we have to be very vigilant because tendency to jump to the high expectations, but to try to figure out how to get around them. But IEP teams and parents involved in IEP teams, I think it's critical as throughout a child's career in school, but particularly as those transition years are being approached. So you know what the requirements are for all students, because that we want to shoot for, the same knowledge and skills as other kids are getting, and we can't shoot for that if we don't know what they are. We need to know what the standards are. We need to know the policies that surround those. What's going to happen if, my child's teacher starts implementing some changes in what's required in the classroom? Is that going to have an effect on the pathway my child should be taking toward graduation? So I think really being vigilant in wanting to ensure that when a child leaves school, he or she has those knowledge and skills. And what does that mean in terms of the kind of instruction that's needed, the kind of coursework that is taken, the kind of accommodations that are given? All those things I think are critical.
And as we mentioned when you were talking about what families need to know and do, if you're in a state that has this way of exit documents that we talked about, these things that are called diplomas, which I think that's a very troubling thing in itself, that these other things are called, very often they're named diplomas. So that's confusing to families. And then, of course, to make this even more complicated, Martha, there's one thing that we didn't even mention, and that is that, another thing that varies from state to state is whether or not these other exit options are available to all students, or they're just available to kids with disabilities who have IEPs. So that's another question that you need to answer, because some states have these occupational diplomas that kids can earn, and other states, they have designed these options to be specific to kids who are IDEA eligible. So, and of course, I think we made it clear that if they are only available for kids with disabilities, they're designed specifically for kids with disabilities, we consider that to be somewhat of a red flag that you need to kind of start asking, and certainly, as we suggested, that you don't say in third grade or fifth grade that that this youngster is not going to get a regular diploma and is going to be put on some other track. And here again, I think we tried to, while not being judgmental about these policies to any extent, the more we try to make the point that it appears that the more options that are available, the opportunity there is to track kids earlier and earlier into other pathways.
And I think, Candace, that tracks to Marjorie's question, which is how early in the process should the school system make this determination? And she's giving an example of an elementary student who's still on a diploma track for now, but is lagging behind performing below grade level, and they are claiming they cannot modify below grade level standards because she's on a diploma track. And in Maryland, that is early as second and third grade, if a student takes the alternate assessment, they're immediately removing them off the diploma track because of that, which parents do not understand when they are, looking for the alternate assessment.
Right. And I'll be interested in Martha's thoughts about the question, because, my thought would be, if the youngster is IDEA eligible, is receiving special education, specially designed instruction, then I don't understand the claim that they can't modify the grade level standards. And in fact, that's kind of why I think Martha and I are on the same page on this one. We're heavy into promoting what's called standards-based IEPs, so that in fact the academic goals in the IEPs are linked directly to the performance that's required to meet the grade level standard for the enrolled grade of the student. The enrolled grade of the student. And we understand that might not be where they are at any moment in time, but what would be happening is then the services that are designed for that youngster should be targeted to get them to that standard, to that level of proficiency. And if that means making more than one progress in 1 year, that's what it means. That's what special is all about.
Right. So, yeah, I would agree with that, you know, oh, I just hit my head. I don't know. The goal should be on providing access so the student is making progress. And like Candace said, that may mean for some students, probably many of them, that they need to be making more progress in a year than other students. So those services and supports are really, really critical. I think that one thing that's happening in the field right that's going to help is discussion about learning progressions. What do students really need to know and be able to do to keep on track as they go across grades? And it's an easy tendency to say, oh, you know, my student is reading at the second grade level and is in the fourth grade, and so we need to focus on second grade skills. Well, I think that's the approach we need to be taking. We need to be thinking through what kinds of services and supports can we be providing that student so that all the other content that the student needs to have access to is made available to that student. That's the access to the general curriculum. It shouldn't be impeded by, for example, reading skills. And then we need to also provide lots of extra services and supports on reading skills. But it doesn't mean we go back to what's happening in second grade and focus on that, because we do that and the kids are never going to catch up.
Right.
Another question it looks like here, which is that on one of the slides, and we talked about the fact that state policy shows that some states allow the IEPs to determine graduation requirements, but this participant is wondering how any state could not allow IEP team to set graduation requirements. It's like there might be a presumption there that it's always with the IEP team, which it is not.
No. So I would say I'll start. The IEP team is defining those services and supports that a student needs to have access to the general curriculum and to meet the goals, the standards that have been defined by the state. Those services and supports may help define how the student can meet those graduation requirements, or whether, but they do not define the graduation requirements.
But in fact, in some places they are, which is really is probably kind of the worst situation, because no transparency to what's going on.
Right, yeah.
So as Martha mentioned, you know, what we need to start seeing is some kind of a reporting mechanism that we can get some sense of, you know, what's going on here with the kids with disabilities vis-a-vis graduation requirements and the allowances that are being made. But we have that mechanism in place, and when states where there's no state exit exam or other very stringent state requirements, then it's punted to the LEA, and then the LEA punts it down to the IEP team, and we have no idea what's really going on. I think another I wanted to mention is that for those of you who are following the changes that are being made to the process by which states get these annual determinations of how well they're implementing IDEA, called an effort called results-driven accountability. We've had this round of state determinations put out this past June, using an additional component called the results matrix that measures some outcomes performance data for students with disabilities in that determination, which prior to this has been strictly compliance-based. And we've been advocating for this kind of change or shift for many years, so we're pleased to see the department to take this on. It's certainly a big challenge. But one of the things that we feel is very important to that results matrix is graduation rate. But when the department released the determinations in June, they said that, we want to use graduation rate. We have a placeholder for graduation rate in the results matrix. However, we can use it until we kind of try to figure out all of these anomalies that are going on that we talked about for the last hour and 50 minutes. So there's one more reason why we kind of need to get our arms around all of the issues on this topic.
Yeah, and thank you both. I think that one of the things that, in terms of the IEP teams setting graduation requirements, that we have to keep in mind is something that Martha's report and states that when we do that, we have to think that just someone else might change the definition of what constitutes proficiency, doesn't mean that we have actually produced a student who is prepared for the future, and that we haven't actually, by giving a student what could be a meaningless diploma in terms of the work world, have we shortchanged them rather than done them a favor. And I think that to me is the most important, element of all of this, is making sure that the diploma that is awarded is actually means something to the student and enables them, as you said from the very beginning, to access a career or to access post-secondary education.
To mean something to those post-secondary education institutions and to employers, so that there's transparency about what those documents mean. So, two more questions. In Maryland, does the Bridge program still exist as an option after failing the high school? I don't know. I don't know anything about Maryland. Do you know about?
I do not know whether if you fail the high school exams. Don't know. But one of the things that we haven't talked about too is that I know that a number of folks in terms of the IEP have been pushing for those, rather than a student receiving, lowering the standards to give the student the diploma at 18, and as Candace said, potentially cutting off services and support, taking that extra couple of years to, make sure that all of the content is geared towards goals that will enable them to secure a regular high school diploma and a meaningful diploma. So that's something else to consider. I don't know if that's what the bridge to be or not, but it looks like we have two answers that say that it's
Maryland people answering your question, right?
That say it is still going and there's no talk of removing. So.
You know that Maryland does have one of the more stringent requirement policies, and that's debatable to feel about that. But as we indicated, it would appear that the fewer options you have and the more rigid you are with your accommodations policies, the allowances, modifications, the more kids you're going to have earning regular high school diplomas. So, anything else? If not, we'll
don't see anything. I'd like to thank you both for sharing your time and your expertise with us. This session has been recorded and will be posted on higherexpectationsforall.org along with the handouts. Again, really want to thank you both for sharing this information and speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. It's been lovely to be with you.
Yes.
I hope you feel better.
Thank all of you who have participated. I hope everybody has a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.